Previously, we've talked about some topics you find in the book of Proverbs, the wisdom book of the Old Testament. And about 3 sessions ago, we ended by talking about some things that Proverbs chapter 6 says God hates. It's in chapter 6, beginning in verse 16 down through verse 19. This is the way that it reads once again. These 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift to running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brethren. And we talked about that at the end of really a session on laziness, lack of responsibility or taking responsibility, an absence of motivation. And the last time we were together, we talked about the first part of verse 19, the false witness who speaks lies. And we mentioned that we were going to talk about the very last statement, the person that sows discord among brethren. The word that's translated discord actually can elsewhere mean strife or carry with it that kind of idea. So it's like division that actually exists. Sometimes I think it's unintentional. Sometimes maybe statements or actions don't even take into account what might occur. And sometimes the intentionality of it is something that exists within this world. So the last verse again, verse 19, a false witness who speaks lies is an abomination to God. So is one who sows discord among brethren. I want to take a look at several other statements about sowing, about planting certain things, this kind of topic, as we go through the book of Proverbs and look at some other instances of similar thinking. To begin with, in chapter 16 of Proverbs, towards the end, the verse actually is verse 28. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates the best of friends. But it's in a category that includes several things. It starts in verse 27. An ungodly man digs up evil, and it is on his lips like a burning fire. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates the best of friends. A violent man entices his neighbor and leads him in a way that is not good. He winks his eye to devise perverse things. He purses his lips and brings about evil. He actually, by the way he even sets his mouth, what he's going to say is something that brings about evil. Just a couple of verses later, the statement is made that he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. There are certain times when we all get frustrated about things. In fact, James said that if anybody is able to bridle his tongue in every situation, he's a perfect person, and none of us are. Sometimes frustration gets the best of us and brings out the worst of us. But here's a statement about sowing strife that says a whisperer separates the best of friends. And while that may not be the intent of the one who actually is doing the whispering, unfortunately it's very often a tragic result. And there's another instance just a couple of chapters later in chapter 22. In verse number 8, he who sows iniquity will reap sorrow, and the rod of his anger will fail, or the strength of his anger ultimately is going to be destroyed. But building upon what was stated in chapter 16, I want you to notice something that you find towards the latter part of chapter 26 of Proverbs. It begins in verse 17. It carries with it this kind of thought, but actually kind of expands on it as well. Beginning in verse 17, he who passes by and meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a dog by the ears. You can almost picture the individual that here's this angry dog, and you're grabbing him by his ears. That really doesn't stop those teeth from getting real close to you. Something that can actually come back to bite you, and often does. Like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. Where there is no wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no talebearer, strife or discord ceases. It stops. As charcoal is to burning coals and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the innermost body. A lot of things to be stated about the way that we talk. And again, the man that's able to perfectly speak without making any kind of mistakes is somebody that has the control of his language and his tongue and his feelings and an awareness of his surroundings that makes him perfect. And James says nobody's like that. It's amazing. Every time I make a grammatical mistake, I'm totally aware of it. Maybe more so than anybody else, and I don't like it. But the idea of this kind of frustration that carries with it bringing forth strife, whether we're talking about Proverbs 26 or chapter 16 or chapter 6, what's involved? Or what is it that causes maybe an outburst when we're frustrated? Sometimes, if we think about it, and I have to admit that this past week had some things that were kind of frustrating, and I didn't really think through the process. How do we need to approach that? Maybe the best way when something actually seems very frustrating to us, and we just can't comprehend why something is being stated or something is being done, maybe in the conversation we need to say, this is my perception of what is stated. This is my perception of what's going on. And this is the way I feel about that perception that I have. Please help me understand why my perception is incorrect. Please help me to understand why the way I view certain things is incorrect. That needs to be the approach. And sadly, I didn't take that approach this week, which really, if I had actually preface some statements with that kind of statement, I think it would have been more beneficial, but I think that's true of all of us. Instead of being frustrated, we need to ask questions. Sometimes when we don't like the answer to those questions, maybe we need to ask more questions or ask for some clarity. Sowing discord among other people, separating the best of friends, is as old as humanity. And it's a problem with every generation. And if we could get to the point where there is a habit of stating, this is the way I perceive what you're saying, or this is my perception of that action, and this is how I feel about it. Please help me understand why my perception and my feeling may be incorrect. If that step were always taken, a lot of things that become problematic would not really be so. We live in a culture, however, where disagreement is not something that is looked upon with any kind of positive impact. It's not that I want to look at two sides of the coin. In culture wants to silence one set of those possibilities or one area of argument in that disagreement. We don't need it within the body of Christ. And yet sometimes it filters in and it finds our way within the body of Christ, even though it should not. Next time you're frustrated, try to remember, as will I, this is my perception of what's going on, and this is the way I feel about it. Please help me understand why my perception may be incorrect. Interesting topic, and I think a lot of food for thought. Please stay safe. We'll talk again soon.